Morning, folks. Hope you're all well. I haven't ranted in a while, so I thought since I've got a few minutes before the next thing I'm scheduled to do this morning, that I'd talk a little bit more at you about things that, I find interesting, worth thinking about, and, that kind of thing. And, of course, that has to do with music, particularly composition, music theory, the history of music theory, the history of musical composition. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing, and I hope you guys do too, is, reading in the throne room. You got to be there anyway, so it's productive, more ways than one, to occasionally pick up a book that you're on a topic that you're interested in and read a few pages. You don't have to be a whole lot, just a few pages, and to keep working through it. There are many kinds of things that one could read, and this is something that I enjoy doing. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit particularly about today, about this book. It's called Contemporary Harmony. It was written by a theorist, and she may or may not have been a composer. I don't remember. I haven't done much research on her other than just knowing that I think she taught in California. But this book particularly was Contemporary Harmony. This particular edition, I think it's the first edition, was published in 1966. So it's really not contemporary anymore. But in the 1960s, it would have been. And it's occasionally interesting to get a sense of what the scene was like, basically, at least from the point of view of one or two or three or four writers that you're reading. And one of the things that I particularly appreciate about this book, again, here it is again, Contemporary Harmony by Ludmila Ulehla, is the fact that while a lot of theoretical writing tends to be quite dense going and tends to be a little dry and a little tiresome after a while. I just finished a book on Elliot Antokolitz's book on the music of Bartók. And while it's a fascinating read, it's also a very dense read, and it takes a certain amount of it's slow-going reading, fascinating reading, but slow-going reading. And one of the things that I like best about this book here is Ludmila, on occasion, or Ulehla, on occasion, cracks a joke now and again. And her sense of timing with her jokes, I think, is very, 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 very helpful. And it kept me at least reading. It's nice to crack a smile now and again, even in something like this, theory and the history of theory and the history of composition. So this is a really good book for that reason, for one. Number two, it's a very interesting sort of survey, sort of state of the art in 1966 or so of what art music was all about, and it references a number of composers and whose names I know, but music I hadn't heard much of. And looking through the examples in her book has made me want to, I'd never heard the Sixth Symphony of William Schumann, so I really should go and look at that, because the passage that she's got in here of that is really kind of interesting for a number of reasons. So, humor, always a good thing in reading, no matter what subject you're dealing with. Exposure to music that I would not necessarily have known about without it. But there are also a couple of really interesting points here. Some kind of, I think, very thought-provoking ideas, or at least thought-provoking for me. And they're not very long. But I wanted to read them to you and just share them with you, because I think they're really quite fascinating, and stimulate, and they stimulate thought. And the first one that I came across, I want to read to you, is in her chapter on polychords and polytonality. And this is how, on the success and thrive on the polychords, they're how on their effective use in a composition. Polychords thrive on dissonant, clashing chord members, and their successful use depends on their location, not only within the phrase, but within the context of the entire composition. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, especially when analyzing something like this, out of a theory book particularly, is that what you're getting is kind of a sort of a sense of where a particular thing was being used in the composition, but you haven't seen the whole composition, and it's worth going and putting what you see in the textbook back into the context of the piece as a whole. I think that's really quite fat. That's good. That's a good thought for us to keep in mind. The other thing is sort of similar to that. See if I can't pull this up fairly quickly and efficiently. Where is that? Find it. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, this is another thing that is talking about her chapter on contrapuntal writing counterpoint. And another brief quote that I think is worth thinking about and keeping in mind, both as analytically as well as creative compositionally. And it reads as follows, is on page 345. In brief, the success of good contrapuntal writing is contained in the adherence to the stylistic demand set up by the initial ideas of the composition. So, and once again, you get this idea of long term, of following a contrapuntal idea or a musical idea from the beginning through to the end of the piece. And it's worth doing, both from an analytical standpoint, but also from a compositional standpoint, to consider how you're using your ideas and how these things will unfold through time to the end of the piece. Right? To have that in mind. Also, of course, to keep in mind that if you come up with something that you like better than what you've thought of at the beginning, then you can use what you come up, the different idea can replace the old idea. So I think this is really rather fascinating, this idea of humor in theory textbooks. Going back and reading some of the ancient textbooks and comparing their insights to what's being talked about today in theory textbooks. And the idea, so all those things I think are just really interesting. You know, while you're sitting on the throne, you got to read anyway. You got to find something to do to keep yourself occupied. You may as well read, and instead of just glad rags, scandal sheets, and the comings and goings of the latest Hollywood gossip, you could be reading stuff that's of interest to you and stimulating to you. And for me, this kind of thing, the history of theory, history of composition, great stuff. Stuff. There's that word again. Bye for now.